Hello everyone, Waxo here. If you've been following the channel for a while, you may remember that in the first Waxo report, I spoke on how Outriders, the upcoming looter shooter from People Can Fly and Square Enix, was among some of the first games to announce a delay in the year, from a February 2nd release to April 1st. Fans looking forward to the title weren't completely out of luck, however, since along with the news came the reveal for a pretty extensive demo that would allow for you to play through the early parts of the story as any of the 4 classes and transfer progression and loot over to the full version. Now with the release of the demo, I have decided to check out what it is it has to offer and see just how it plans to distinguish itself in a genre that's been pretty hit or miss over the last decade. And after about 5 playthroughs with all the classes, I have to say that there are some things that I do enjoy, but also a decent amount that just isn't clicking with me. Set in a future where Earth has been destroyed by humanity, society has set out in a spacefaring voyage for the planet known as Enoch, a far-off world that has taken more than 80 years to reach. The player character is an Outrider, who are an outfit of soldiers turned mercenaries who is freshly out of cryogenic sleep and is among the first to touch down on Enoch. After being tasked with searching for probes, a job that ends up going horribly wrong when a deadly storm comes in and starts killing soldiers and seemingly mutating you, Maxwell, a scientist who seems to be heading the landings and doesn't want to miss his window, kills your boss and commands his soldier to kill you and the others trying to convince him in postponing the landings. After getting through soldiers and killing Maxwell, you end up mortally wounded and put in cryogen yet again so that you can recover. When you awake, however, it's 31 years in the future and humans are back to being at war with one another and factions split between the insurgents, who believe that the group that first touched down on the planet purposefully kept resources from them and left everyone else to fend for themselves, and the ECA, the group your Outrider was a part of before everything went wrong. After escaping the insurgents though, you're impaled by a piece of rebar and your powers are awakened in a scene in which you choose one of the 4 classes. After making out of no man's land, you find Shira, the good scientist that you knew before everything went to crap, who is now the grizzled leader of the ECA. That's a very sparse retelling of the opening scenes, but it's enough to get the point across. When it comes to the general writing here, I have to say that a lot of times it's just really not all that good. Though there are some instances that hint at more promising storytelling, I felt like more often there are moments that are just flat out campy and nonsensical. But what I mean by nonsensical is that there are moments in which the story is seemingly unintentionally contradictory. This is particularly on display with the insurgent captain you run into after waking from your second ice nap. He, without hesitance, decides to throw you into the wasteland because you're ECA and wants to watch you get brutalized by the storm. During the truck ride there, you witness war atrocities committed by the insurgents all along the way, from firing squads to killing their own for the hell of it and laughing as they do so. After a few missions and the side quests open up, you then run into the captain again. At the end of this quest, however, the captain tries to sway your opinion, calling the ECA fascists, and telling you that the insurgents are only fighting for their lives, which again just simply isn't true, when you literally saw them cackling like hyenas as they killed one of their own wounded soldiers. There is then another side quest in which you're tasked with finding one of Shira's lieutenants who's gone missing. After mowing down countless waves of insurgents, you're then greeted with the scene where one asks you to dig out his crew. Among the few dug in is the person that you were sent to rescue, who then shoots the insurgent that helped him and blows up the rest of his crew. The lieutenant tries to mockingly explain away his actions, but is swiftly killed by some far-off sniper in a moment meant for laughs. When checking back in with Shira, she tells you that whatever he did should be forgiven since war is war, and you respond by asking if what you're fighting for is even worth it, in which Shira doesn't respond. And looking at these 2 moments leaves me just shaking my head at the game and its message, because you, as the player character, cannot be further removed from what's being said. Think about it. One side has been portrayed as violent and irredeemable, but then asks for you to be sympathetic towards them despite literally trying to kill you not even 30 minutes ago. When he tries to suggest that the side you're on is no good in a scene with a genuinely good insurgent who in the moment wanted to help everyone in a bad situation, not only is it after you've killed dozens more of them, but when the lieutenant kills them and Shira asks you to forgive them for doing so, not only are you the biggest damn hypocrite for being angry, but Shira not addressing the situation at all aside from brushing it off as what to be expected from war drops the ball and adding nuance to what's going on in the game's world. Maybe it's too early to call it in a demo, or maybe I'm just expecting too much from the people behind Bulletstorm, but that's just where I am with the story and the writing so far. One last thing I want to mention also is the pretty frequently cutscenes feel jumbled together and poorly edited, and some line delivery also comes off as unintentionally hilarious from time to time.
Help me!
To the right thing! Call it in! Postpone the fucking landing!
The biggest seller for Outriders is its gameplay, and I'll be straightforward and say that, for the most part, I found it to be really solid. The game's intent is to drive players into aggressive play, essentially rewarding you for moving in and out of cover as you mow your way through enemies. Killing actually activates a thing called Life Leech, which is how you regain most of your health rather than waiting for it to fully recharge while stuck in cover. A feature I actually really enjoyed. Frequently, I did in fact find myself rushing headlong or flanking into groups of enemies and having an absolute blast in doing so. Enemies start out on the weaker side, but get tougher as the world tier gets higher, which is the leveling system that determines both the game's difficulty and the tier of loot you're rewarded. And for the most part, it does this without making the AI feel bullet spongy. There definitely are some that do, however, especially when you get to captains, but the game gives you plenty of great loot that'll help you immensely along the way. Weapon status effects are powerful and really feel like they do something significant rather than minor effects. Heck, there are effects on weapons that are solely meant to play off other statuses and end up being pretty great. For example, on one character I had a shotgun that if you shot someone affected by a status, that would then spread to an enemy nearby as well. So if one character was on fire, then shot by the shotgun, well now his buddy standing next to him is also on fire. The only issue I have with statuses in the game is that they don't really explain to you what some of them are. Everyone who's played these kind of games may know what poison or burn is, but some player abilities and weapons will affect a status called ash, which I never saw explained during my playtime. I actually had to look it up in order to find out that it actually renders a character immobile for a while. Now we get to the 4 classes of Outriders, which are the Technomancer, Pyromancer, Trickster, and Devastator. And if I had to choose one of the 4 classes as the best, my choice without a second thought goes to the Trickster, which is absolutely the most broken class in the entire game. I say this not only because the Trickster gets a shield unlike every other class, but their abilities have the absolute best synergy for what the game is trying to be. Each character has 4 abilities you can try in the demo, and all 4 of the Tricksters are just so damn good. The first being a blade that not only cuts through multiple characters in one swipe, but then explodes these people in what's way more often a one-shot kill than not. The next ability is a giant time sphere in which all those inside of it, except yourself of course, are slowed to a snail's pace, which combined with a shotgun allows for you to mow down enemies with absolute ease and get your health back due to the life leech. The third lets you teleport behind a person you select and gives you an additional shield on top of the one you already have, and allows for you to strategically place yourself in a position to combo with one or both of your other skills for just complete and utter devastation to the enemy forces. And twisted rounds, well, let me show you what twisted rounds combined with some of the other abilities can do. The next I would say is best is the Devastator class, which does indeed make you feel like a front and center powerhouse. Though the first ability, Earthquake, which digs undercover to damage the opposition, is pretty useful, the real fun comes when you get the Golem, Gravity Leap, and Reflect bullets. Being able to launch yourself a great distance into a ground attack that kills those close to you, shroud yourself in rock armor that blocks 60% of damage, and absorb all the rounds being shot at you like Neo out of the Matrix, and throw those bullets back into those around you is wholly satisfying. Now we're in the weaker half of the classes, which I'll preface with the fact that even between the last 2, there is one much closer to the one's prior in power output than the other by a marginal difference. The one that I'm talking about is actually Pyromancer. Again, I found Pyromancer to be very strong, but mostly just 2 out of the 4 abilities that are available. The first of the 4 abilities, which sends out a wave of fire straight for your enemies, works a lot like Devastator's Earthquake ability, but when I got to Pyromancer, it just felt a little too similar for me. It does do a decent amount of damage though. The middle 2 abilities, which include a lash that applies that pesky ash I was talking about earlier, is actually really handy in taking down captains, as it allows for you to single them out and gives you a brief moment to sustain shots on them before they reanimate. The third one turns out to be Pyromancer's strongest, allowing you to essentially mark a target and do significant fire damage to them. It doesn't stop there however, as if you kill them while they are marked, they actually levitate in the air and explode, doing a tremendous amount of damage to those around them that acts as an excellent form of crowd control. Then there's the 4th ability. When triggered, it interrupts enemies in a large area and inflicts 10 fire damage. If someone is already affected by fire however, it instead does 118 before removing the burn effect. The ability just doesn't seem all too viable, as it requires you to run it plus either your first ability, which in turn makes you have to choose between one of your more powerful moves, or instead have a weapon that can cause burn. Overall, Pyro is a pretty solid choice with potential, but just not on the level that I found with Devastator and Trickster. And now let's talk about Technomancer, which for me was the weakest link out of the bunch, and actually didn't really warrant as much playtime as I did with the others. Honestly, Technomancer just doesn't seem to fit the overall style of how the game is meant to be played. It seems like it'd be more useful in the Division rather than here. I say that because it's the long-range defensive class, and while long-range gameplay is fine as snipers are incredibly powerful, finding myself using them rather frequently, the kind of gameplay encouraged out of Technomancer just doesn't seem right in a game that pushes you forward. Whether that's the ridiculous amount of grenades chucked at you that almost always land right behind the piece of cover that you're stuck behind, the heavies that constantly push your position, or the AI that generally tries to flank you. The abilities of Technomancer include a proximity bomb that, though can be chucked at enemies, isn't triggered until people walk by it, an ice cannon that freezes after a certain amount of shots, a missile launcher that fires a barrage in a straight path, and blighted rounds, which work a lot like Trickster's twisted rounds, only dealing poison damage. None of these abilities really seem to play well with one another like the rest of the classes did, and honestly just felt thrown together in comparison. When it comes to cooperative gameplay, I have to say that aside from bosses getting more spongy and more enemies being thrown at you, there isn't a whole lot different here. Not that that's a bad thing per se. Actually, having to fight through more people while comboing abilities off your teammate was really fun, as it left hordes reduced to gibbed, bloody puddles. When it comes to issues I had in the game, both bugs and just by design, there's only one bug that I really ran into, and it's kind of a big one, because sometimes your character just doesn't want to get into cover, which is kind of important in a cover-based shooter. There were quite a few times where I found myself mashing the cover button only for it to not at all respond, with my character confused as they stared at the wall in front of them. Something that seems like it can be an issue down the line is actually the class tree. Each of the 4 classes has a tree that allows for 3 specialization paths that seems like it could allow for pretty fluid character builds. The issue I have with it though, at least at a glance since you don't really progress much in it during the demo, is that a lot of the upgrades seem rather too redundant. What I mean by this is that there's a lot of opportunities to buff things such as anomaly power, also known as the strength of your abilities, health and resistance rather than abilities that make your class unique. Then there are captains. Though the captains are rather difficult as they can be temporarily immune to some of your abilities, have their own that are often rather devastating, and just seem spongy, they make for challenging speed bumps from time to time. The issue I have though is that fighting captains is often in an arena that also has about 24 other people shooting at you. There were times that I had to completely lure the captain in the area away from the fighting in order to fight them properly, which felt like I was gaming the system rather than playing how the devs intended me to do so. But I found having to balance all those enemies plus the captain a little too much with the weaker classes. I'm looking directly at you, Technomancer. Overall, Outriders is an experience that's a little bit all over the place. While the gameplay is pretty solid and the majority of the classes a blast to play, and the powers allow for you to feel and play like a straight up badass, I do have some minor concerns about how the class tree will actually work. Loot is oftentimes awesome, and status effects, though sometimes vague, have proved to be useful so far. The world tier system also seems like a very smart addition to the genre. Though I feel issues concerning like the cover system I mentioned earlier, and some of the glitches and bugs with the cutscenes can be ironed out before launch, the strongest issue I have with the game still is its story. Again, it has moments that hint at a possible stronger narrative, but overall it just seems like a dumb mess so far. Again, this isn't the final game, and the story very well might improve as you play through, so take my word on the story with a grain of salt, if you do plan on buying this one. If you're more interested in the gameplay aspect, then I can happily say that this is one of the most satisfying looter shooters that I've played in recent, having not been one to really get into the grindiness of Destiny and the Division all that much. If any of that sounds the least bit intriguing, the demo is available on all platforms except for the Nintendo Switch, so if you're interested in giving it a try, go ahead and do so. I highly suggest it. If you have played it, be sure to leave a comment down below on what you liked, what you didn't like, or what you're feeling in between about. This has been Waxo, and until next time, take it easy.